He said that Israel had become a liability to the United States, a strategic liability which was endangering American interests, both on the battlefields in which they're engaged, but also more generally. So between Britain and the United States, the Netanyahu government really is in terrible trouble. But it's not sufficient. If the London embassy of Israel was being used for criminal purposes, it should be closed down. The ambassador should be sent home. We can't tolerate, and we wouldn't tolerate, if this was happening out of the Iranian embassy,
yes,
the ambassador would already be on his way.
But do you think that, as you know, that media in this country is especially owned by most Israeli people who have interest in Israel are owned by a special lobby, which I don't want to mention the name. Do you think that they are in a position to blackmail British and American politicians? And as you have said yourself, that if it was Pakistan, another country, this has been made news, it should have been made news for days and weeks to come. But this news, it was in there one day, and second day, it's not on Fox News, not on the Sky News, not on CNN.
Yes, that's not because of any ethnic or religious reason, of course. Mr. Rupert Murdoch, who owns both Fox and Sky, is not a Jew. He's a Catholic, in fact. He's a papal knight, knighted by the previous Pope. And the vast majority of media in Britain and America is not owned by Jews, but it is owned by supporters of Israel.
Exactly.
It's owned by Zionist supporters who believe that the settler state of Israel has the right to and should be supported in continuing to plant illegal settlements in Jerusalem and in the West Bank, continue to besiege Gaza and starve the people there, to punish them for voting in a democratic election for the wrong party, so far as they are concerned. And that's undoubtedly true, that the story disappeared quickly, far more quickly than it would have done if the boot had been on the Pakistani or the Iranian foot.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
I'm taking you one last question, George, and I'm again grateful that you have came to our studios,
my
and
privilege.
You're taking a part which I think is somehow relevant as well. Israel is not limiting itself to Middle East, it's also meddling now in South Asia. What do you think Israel is trying to achieve having its joint operations with Indian RA and CIA? There's a place called Jablul Saraj, north of Kabul. And it's confirmed now that last 3-4 years they are operating joint operations with CIA and RA. What do you think they're trying to achieve there?
Well, I must tell you, it's one of the saddest things in my political life that India, which was the first country in the world to extend diplomatic relations with the PLO, which had the warmest possible relations with the late President Arafat, which historically took a very progressive role in Middle Eastern affairs, indeed in international politics generally, has gone over entirely to the other side. The current government of India, and more importantly, the ongoing state institutions who continue, whoever's in power in the parliament, have effectively gone over to the imperialist camp. And the cooperation that you mentioned is another manifestation of that. The idea of Indian security services maneuvering with the Mossad is a profoundly depressing turn of events. And of course, it's part of a general attempt to keep the Muslim world divided and weak, and keep perceived threats at bay, all the while actually making perceived threats more real by the fanaticization that I talked about. You see, some people think these aeroplanes that hit the Twin Towers in New York and killed all those people came out of thin air. But in fact, they emerged out of a swamp of hatred and bitterness in the Muslim world about the double standards and the injustice being practiced in the Muslim world, principally on Palestine, secondly on the invasion and occupation and destruction actually of Iraq, and thirdly the Western policy of backing up and propping up every dictator who rules the Muslim world from one end to the next, almost without exception. So the reality is Israel and the United States have historically been a part of that injustice. It's just a great, great pity that India has decided to join them. What a team. Imagine voluntarily joining up with the killers of the Mossad and the CIA. Many Indian people must be very ashamed of that.
George,
as my friend has said that there was the last question, but as you are going on election convincing, I've got a question for you, especially for the Labour government. If you've seen that 10-15 years ago, there was no application fee for any kind of immigration, apart from if you are coming from abroad and you are only paying for entry clearance. There was no fee for if you are changing status in this country or applying for an extension. There was none. But Labour government initially started from 75 pound, and then now it's 820, and in next they're now from 6th of April, they're increasing to 1600 pounds.
Yes.
And does your Respect Party have?
No, we'd scrap these, of course, and we'll fight in Parliament against these and any subsequent increases. In fact, it's a great shame that Labour launched its 5 pledge promise card just a couple of days ago. And imagine a Labour government raising the issue of immigration for electoral purposes, that they're going to
siding with BNP.
crack down on immigration. This was once the preserve of the BNP, then the Conservative Party. Now it's the BNP, the Conservatives and Labour. That's why people should think
thank
about
you.
an alternative.
There's a listener, there's a caller online who would like to ask you a question. It's Mrs. Tahir from Bradford. Assalamu alaikum.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum.
Ji, Mrs. Tahir, what would you like to ask?
I want to ask Mr. Judge Galloway that what's the definition of terrorism, and why don't the rest of the world establish law which can force superpowers not to invade the most helpless and poorest countries of the world?
Well, the late and great Jewish personality Peter Ustinov defined terrorism this way. He said, war is the terrorism of the rich and powerful, and terrorism is the war of the poor and powerless.
Exactly.
In other words, terrorism is what the other fellow does, never what you do. And of course, we're all against terrorism, but some of us are against the terrorism of the small man with the beard and the turban in the Tora Bora, and the man in a suit in Whitehall or the White House who pushes a button and kills hundreds of thousands of people. In the case of Iraq, more than 1 million people. To quote another great philosopher, St. Augustine, in his book City of God, he says that he tells of an encounter between Alexander the Great and a pirate ship. And Alexander demands of the pirate captain, "How dare you terrorize these waters as a thief?" And the captain says, "How dare you terrorize the whole world? You with your great navy can call yourself an emperor and can call other men what you please." Now that's exactly the world that we have today. These self-appointed emperors can describe this country as a failed state, a rogue state, a terrorist state, whilst they themselves are carrying out policies which not only help recruit the terrorists, but actually constitute terrorism
Goes to
themselves.
Basic, might is right.
Yes.
Last question, George. Our viewers know, I know, and many people in the world know that you are friends of Pakistan, friends of Kashmir, friend of Palestine, and anywhere in the world where there are people oppressed.
Injustice, yeah.
Now, Pakistan is going through a very tricky time. There is hardship, there is violence. Pakistan has been threatened by its neighbors, and Pakistan has been threatened by some of the world's superpowers. What will be your message to people of Pakistan listening in Pakistan and Pakistani community in the UK?
Well, excuse me, mashallah, I have the honor of holding the Hilali Qaid-e-Azam, the Hilali Pakistan, 2 of the highest awards in Pakistan. I have a very long association with the democratic cause in Pakistan and with the just cause of the people of occupied Kashmir. My advice would be to seek national unity. This is not the time to break up. This is not the time for people to be killing each other. This is the time for Pakistanis to rally behind their flag, behind their country, and to stand up for themselves in international affairs. They're being used as a plaything at the moment. And the government has failed in this regard, as indeed the dictatorship of Musharraf and the previous dictatorship of Zia al-Haq also did.